Okay, cool. I think I got you that one.
Just a reminder to everybody participating in the meeting, if you're not speaking, please keep yourself muted for the time being so those people speaking can be heard. Thank you.
Oops, that was me probably. Sorry.
Oh, well then, Emily.
Okay, I'm muted now.
I'm
in a room with some other people, but
fair enough.
they promised to be quiet. Looks like Steve has joined us.
Well, good. Steve, are you there?
Hi, I'm here temporarily. I may have to jump off briefly.
Okay, well you make us a quorum.
Oh,
I think,
okay.
Is that right?
Yes.
So let's just.
I don't know what to do. I'm in line for an appointment in the next 5 or 10 minutes, and but I'll be done in about 5 minutes after that.
Gotcha. Well, you're very kind to be so multitaskingly efficient, Steve. Thank you.
Hey, Steve, maybe just let us know when you got to go and when you come back, please.
Yes, I can do that.
Yeah, so we can
thanks
do
for doing
little,
that.
Yeah, a little bit of work then. So we do, let's just verify we do have a quorum. So there's 7 voting members. We need 4 people. So there's me, Emily, the chair, and then Todd's here. The vice chair, Steve, is here. That's 3. And Michael Crone is here. That's 4.
Sorry, I have to jump off now.
Okay, that's back to 3. Unless, thank you. Unless I've just, let's see. So the only other person who may be able to come is Mark. I have just texted him to see if he's coming, but and Robbie, we weren't sure about. Is that right, Todd?
Correct. His email was, I wasn't sure if it was addressing this meeting or the December meeting saying he couldn't attend.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like Steve will be able to join us in under 10 more minutes. I suggest we just, is there anything we can do without a quorum, Todd? Not really, right? It's not that you just can't meet. You can't just, obviously we couldn't decide anything, but we can't meet either, really, right? Like we can't approve the agenda. I guess that would be a decision, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Right. So we can meet and we could discuss things, is my understanding. I'd ask if Michael Crone knows differently because I'm not 100% familiar with these rules, but I think you're correct. We can meet, we could talk, but we can't decide things.
So we're not supposed to deliberate toward a decision without a quorum. So I would say most talking that like we could chat about our weekend plans and.
Well, do you have any good ones?
No, not really.
We could put together a good plan for Michael.
That sounds great, guys. Let's plan my life out. Weekend and beyond. No, what are you doing in Olympia, Emily? Are you working up there?
No, actually, I am my sisters we all live equidistant from Olympia. So we have met up for a get together.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, so we're just in like a random condo near the Capitol and it's raining. But that's lovely. There's some trees near here. And yeah, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, Olympia is pretty. My wife and my older daughter were just there actually last weekend visiting a friend who is at Evergreen.
Oh, what do you know about Evergreen these days? I'm interested.
Very little, honestly. Sounds like they have a lot of like hybrid situation happening now due to COVID, which I think a lot of campuses look very different right now than in a normal year. So it sounded like that was noticeable, but I don't really know much about the school.
Yeah.
Well, I have even less exciting experiences in Olympia.
This is great. Okay, what's your unexciting experience in Olympia?
I went up there once for a job interview. Got to see some administrative offices. Thought it was very nice.
Well, I'm glad they didn't snag you.
No, they offered it to me, but I actually already had this position as the deputy, that is. So they lost
Even
out.
better.
Even better.
Did. It looks like another person has joined the chat, and just to update you, we are waiting for one more member who's so we can have a quorum, and then we'll go forward. So thank you for your patience and everybody else who's also joined, but it should be just a couple more minutes.
I just sent Mark an email as well. I know you texted him too, so perhaps we'll catch him.
Okay.
One way or the other. I don't think I got an RSVP from him for this meeting.
Yeah, I don't think I put it on the agenda, but we should probably set like a regular
There's Mr. Landauer.
Get on. Hey.
Yeah, forgive me. Hey, forgive me, everybody. I'm sorry. I was tied up in another meeting, and regrettably, I just couldn't extricate myself. And so here I am. I apologize for my tardiness.
Don't worry. Thank you so much for joining. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Now we have a quorum. Steve Suo is just going to join us in about 5 minutes after. So we'll have, but we have enough to go ahead, I think, now. So yeah, thanks, Mark, for, in fact, extracting yourself. Okay, so welcome everybody. What should we do? Sorry, Todd, you were about to say something. I was just going to run through the agenda.
No, I was not.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I was just going to say I'm back.
Oh, is that Steve?
Yeah, this is Steve.
Oh, fantastic. So now we have 5 people here. Mark, Steve, Michael, Emily, Todd, Senator Thatcher, and some other people, members of the public. So yay, thank you everybody for being here. So this is the first meeting of the Legislative Committee of the Oregon Public Records Advisory Council. And just for folks who may be joining the first time, this is one of three subcommittees that the PRAC has put together to try to put our work plan together for the next, year or so. We have a number of, we've had a discussion in the larger PRAC about potential legislative priorities. And so we'll be delving into those today. And then any decisions we make here would go back to the entire PRAC to decide what our way forward is. So first of all, there is an agenda that I will drop in the meeting chat. There's three links to documents in the chat. And Mark, since you just joined, I wonder if you could tell me if you see all 3, because I'm never sure whether the call software, you only see things that are posted after you join, but you have all 3. The link to the doc of suggested areas of work concepts, the PRAC approved legislative concepts to direct to, and then the agenda, the most recent one. Do you see all those in the chat, Mark? You're muted.
Yes, I do believe that the link is there now. Yes.
But do you see 3 links? Like if you scroll back up, do you get to the one that was posted at 12:03?
Forgive me, just catching up.
Yeah, no, you're actually, this is super helpful because I am trying to make sure anybody who joins later, whether they will have access to those links or not.
I'm looking at PRAC 2021 legislative concepts.
And that was something that you got to through the link in the chat of this meeting. Great.
Correct.
And then above that
is then the other one document that you shared was sort of the all the issues that each one of us voted on, if that makes sense, exemptions, data gathering, deadlines, fees, PRA and as an institution, public body awareness. I have that document up.
Is that called the potential work areas?
It was sent by Todd, approved legislative concepts to discuss, and
Okay,
then
great.
Emily, the link to the doc of suggested areas of work concepts.
Great.
Those
So
are
those
the
are
two documents that I saw.
perfect. Those are all then still accessible to anybody who joins the meeting. Yay. And then the most recent, oh, Steve is only seeing the agenda in this chat. Okay. So let me just dump those back in. Here, so the agenda is right there, and then right below the agenda is now the legislative concepts document, and right below that is now the same ideas, which is broken out a different way, that Steve put things together in buckets. So this should be a familiar document to you, Steve. And those are just, those three documents will be useful to everyone during the meeting. So the agenda has 7 items. We have 2 hours, and maybe we won't need all that time. I think everyone says that at the beginning of every PrAC meeting. But was there anybody, if you can look this over, if there's anything that anyone would like to add, we have to approve the agenda, to entertain motions to add anything else, to talk about this subcommittee rules of procedures, to quickly review what we're doing here. I've sort of run through that right now, but we'll do that in the agenda. Then we'll look through these spreadsheets of ideas, and we're going to attempt to try to prioritize, 1 or 2 per session, see if we want to do anything this upcoming session, and see if there's others that would make more sense to delay till 2023. We'll have a public
Emily,
comment period. Yeah.
If I may, I want to just be clear when we're talking about next session, that we're talking about 2023 or 2022. The reason I say that is that on November 19th, which is a week from today, all legislative concepts must be filed with Legislative Council. Furthermore, each member of the legislature has been given 2 bills for the introduction during the short session, and each committee has been allocated 3 bills. I would tell you with with a lot of confidence, all those bills have been spoken for, and so the likelihood of us being able to get something introduced for the short session in February is slim to none. And so when we're talking about next session, I just want to be sure that we're being accurate in everybody's expectations. So I apologize for interrupting you on that, but it's an important point that I think we need everybody to be very clear about. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that is super important. And the only way, and I appreciate the specifics on the dates and the limits on the bills. And yes, I would expect most things are gone by now. The reason I wanted to just keep 2020 in the discussion is that if there's perhaps there's some small thing that seems like a real priority, maybe there would be a bill it could tag on to, just to not close that door entirely. But I would fully expect, as we discussed in the larger PrAC meeting, that any significant legislative work that we were going to try to get through the legislature or recommend to the legislature would be taken up in the 2023 session. So not starting in this next calendar year. But yeah, I really appreciate those dates and clarifications. And then just to finish running through the agenda, for anyone who can't see it or anything like that, is we will have a public comment period. And then we'll try to finalize the priorities after anyone who's wanted to speak to anything has had a chance. And it'd be great also today to set a schedule, an assignment, sort of a regular schedule of meetings, so it can get on people's calendars, and then any assignments and next steps, so we're clear going forward. So is there anything that anyone, council members, would like to add to this agenda?
This is Michael. That sounds great to me, Emily, and I really love the idea of getting a regular meeting calendared. I hate nothing more than doodle polls.
100% hate running them. hate filling that. No offense if anybody's like from Doodle here, but okay. So I'm not hearing any motions. Should we go ahead and approve the agenda? Do I have a motion for that?
Oh, Emily, before we do that, I don't know if this would count as adding an agenda item or just something worthy of discussion when we get to the potential legislative concepts, but I have an additional concept I wanted to add for our discussion. So I would just ask if I could, bring it up when we discuss the legislative concepts we already approved.
Totally, that's great.
Well, then I move to approve the agenda in its current form.
Okay, second.
I will second. This is Michael again.
Okay, everybody in favor say aye.
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 Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay. And okay, so I've already run through this a little bit, but I'll just say it again since we're in the formal meeting now. The subcommittee rules of procedure are going to be the same as the PRAC, and with subcommittee actions, we'll report back to the PRAC for final approval. So this is a discussion and recommendation session. And our duties as a subcommittee is to look specifically at ideas that members of the PRAC have put forward as potential legislation and bring them back. And then our further duties will be to, research them, explain to the larger PRAC why we think they're important, present a thoughtful and reasoned information back to them so the whole council can make decisions about what to pursue. Does anybody want to add anything else to the items 3 or 4? Any comments about how the subcommittee will operate or what our duties are? That I'd
like to add a couple things.
Please.
Okay, I just want to put on the record if you approve that a simple majority of subcommittee members constitutes a quorum for the purposes of conducting business, and also that this video recording will constitute the record of the subcommittee unless somebody wants to come forward and take minutes and provide those in addition to the recording, which I'm not volunteering to do.
I'd make that motion.
Can I just ask, would somebody mind like jotting down, well, I could do this as the chair. I'll just jot down anything we vote on and provide a small document that would be available to people so that we know what happened that way. Okay, sorry, I interrupted your motion, Mark and Todd. But the simple majority for the subcommittee quorum and that the video will be the main record of the meeting. Yeah, all in favor say aye. Is that a motion? That's a motion.
Yes.
Okay.
We need a second.
We'll need a second.
Are you guys together a first? I'll be a second.
I think Mark put my ideas into a motion and then you just seconded them, Michael.
Okay, and does everyone approve?
Aye.
Proof. Aye.
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 Okay. Okay, great. So let's get to the meat of this. We want to review what suggestions have been put forward for legislative action. I would, so this is where those 2 documents that are in the chat come in. One is, the title of it is PRAC 2021 Legislative Concepts, and the other title is 2021 Subcommittee Potential Work Areas. And that includes the potential work areas for all the subcommittees. But we'll just look at the ones that are legislative. So I went through this and just, to get a sense of what the priorities were. And I think we had a sense of that from the PRAC meeting. So the things that came up the most, significantly the most, were exemptions and fees. So I think we have a couple options here. We can dive into both of those and see if we can talk through what are the various ideas and discover like what research we might need to make our ideas more concrete into proposals and figure out how to do that. Or if there are any that people think, this is really, really urgent, then we could go ahead and do that. Mark, you've got your hand up. I assume you've got a suggestion of how to proceed. Go ahead.
Actually, I don't have a question on how to proceed.
Oh, sorry, I said suggestion.
Well, when we talk about exemptions, I think we need to have a little bit of a discussion here because I'm not clear about what that means, and then B, and I'm honestly not trying to be problematic here. I just need clarity. We did establish a sunshine committee back in Michael, remind me, was it 2017 that we established it, or 2019? One of those years.
17, Mark, you're correct.
And the purpose, if I recall correctly, was that the Sunshine Committee would be reviewing all the exemptions and making a determination as to whether or not those exemptions remain valid today. And I know that's a super big, massive undertaking, considering there are some 500 plus outright exemptions or partial exemptions, and that's a big thing to take on. But I'm curious to know if this is an area that's ripe for our discussion, knowing that there's another body that is reviewing these exemptions. And I'd welcome anybody's feedback. It's just a general question that I have, and I don't know if we're sort of trampling in somebody else's sandbox, if you will.
Let's address that in a second, but I just want to say, so let's talk about exemptions for as long as we need to, and then we will move on to fees. And as long as we need to get some clarity on this question, and then anything else people want to discuss about exemptions. So it's a great question. And I think, Michael, you're a great person to take a first stab at answering that, since you chair the Sunshine Committee.
So I am no longer the chair, actually.
Oh, sorry about that. When did
no,
you get replaced?
I'm glad that I'm no longer the chair. Don't be sorry.
I mean, sorry, I didn't know that, but congratulations.
We have a new chair. Actually, we have co-chairs affected, and they'll be leading our meeting next week. In my view, I think that, while there's not a sandbox, and I don't think it would be perceived as trampling, I do think that sort of the urgency for this committee of addressing exemption issues, we probably ought to regard it as lower, given that there is this other committee who's primarily been tasked with that. I mean, at the end of the day, we have a lot of overlapping authorities, honestly. I think that the PRAC can weigh in on exemption issues. The Sunshine Committee can weigh in on other issues. They're written in ways that, apart from the very specific thing assigned to the subcommittee in terms of exemption review, and the specific thing assigned to the PRAC in terms of overseeing the advocates' work, there's just a lot of overlap. So although I don't think it would be unwelcome or perceived as trampling on the sandbox, for me, those exemption issues in general feel like that we can afford to make them less of a priority here on the PRAC. And because there are so many other things to think about, I guess, in my opinion anyway, we should do that because we're sort of freed to.
Can I ask you a question, Michael? And then I just want to check with the other members to weigh in on that. There are 500 or maybe even 700, I can't remember. And the Sunshine Committee's been in operation for 3 years, and I'm not sure what they've gotten done. So I just wonder if nothing will happen, right? If it's it's a lot to do. Should we be conscious of it being able to contribute to that very big process?
So the Sunshine Committee has decided, for now anyway, and it may change under new leadership, has been taking a sort of categorical approach to exemptions. So they've divided them into categories, and they have issued reports to the legislature making recommendations on several of those categories. So far as I know, the legislature has not acted on any of those recommendations, or even, I'm not sure they've even really been discussed in a committee meeting at any point, but the recommendations have been conveyed. I think that it will continue to be a lengthy process. And I think, so I guess, to the extent that we can identify priority exemption issues apart from the sort of more systemic review, that there might be some utility to that. I think the members of the Sunshine Committee want to do the same thing, and actually that there's likely to be overlap. The Sunshine Committee really wasn't operating over the last year plus during pandemic, so it's really been 2 years, I would say, not. So it was approved by the 2017 legislature, started meeting in 2018, and then in 2020 it basically went on hiatus that it has only recently returned from. But so I don't think we should discount it either. To me, like, I would say exemptions don't need to be our priority. But if there are so an issue that came up during the hiatus time, for example, right, was the public records exemptions as they apply to police disciplinary records. And I think had the Sunshine Committee been meeting, they would have wanted to weigh in on that. I think it would have been useful for the PRAC to weigh in on that. And I could anticipate that things will come sort of to the forefront again, that it might be useful for us to weigh in on. I just don't know that systemically looking at it is a task that is one we need to take on, because I do believe that is happening and will be slow, but will be effective over there.
Yeah, no, systemic doesn't seem like it would be the right thing, in my opinion, too. I agree with you. Thank you very much for that update. I just want to check in with Todd and Steve and then come back to Mark, who has his hand up. Todd, Steve, do either of you have thoughts about exemptions and their priority for the PRAC?
I definitely agree with the model that Michael's proposing, where the PRAC takes sort of a more active role in attempting to address specific areas of exemptions, not least of which because we can provide legislative concepts to the legislature in a way that the Sunshine Committee isn't empowered to do so. So I don't oppose or think it's a waste of our time to do this. I'm not sure of where to place it in the priority level. So if I could propose like an overall maybe structure to how we want to proceed today, it's sort of akin to what we did last time, get all our issues down on paper. What are the top priorities for each of our members present, and then maybe vote to pick the top however many we then want to move forward on trying to draft or flesh out or propose to the full council to pursue. And exemptions may very well end up being one of those, but perhaps it'll fall as number 4 and we decide to only go with 2 or something like that, because I suspect we're going to want to tackle fees, and that in and of itself can represent a lot of different ways to go and a lot of change we could propose that's going to require a lot of coalition building if we hope for it to succeed in 2023 or later, and that could end up occupying most of our time. There are other things that I consider of importance too that I want to try to get on the agenda. So that's just what I'm suggesting at this point. Not opposed, but not sure if it should be a priority.
Got it. And I'm sorry, I didn't poll the members of the subcommittee on their priorities because I felt like we had this list already from the bigger group, but that's an excellent idea and to go forward.
Yeah, and sorry,
go ahead, Todd. Yeah.
I guess I'm just going to agree right back with you if my dog stops barking. Yeah, we have this list, but we need to decide how to proceed with it. So it's probably better to sort of go back in and like prioritize based on what we have. Plus, I did want to add one.
Yes.
So
yes.
That's all. Thanks.
Exactly. Okay. Steve?
Well, I was just going to add, Todd and I were, as we were discussing the upcoming agenda for the non-legislative committee, exemptions also came up as an item that people had asked about there. We have, and obviously we haven't met yet to discuss any of this, but we've talked about the possibility of sort of fact-finding being one of the activities of the non-legislative subcommittee. So exemptions could fall into that category, and definitely we would be looking for the kind of niche that is not like something much narrower than what the Sunshine Committee is doing, I think.
Mark, you had your hand up. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Emily. I just, again, I just want to remind everybody that it is my intention to ask the Sunshine Committee to come to the PRAC, the full PRAC, at some point in the future, so that there's an opportunity for us to get a better understanding of their work, what they've been up to, and how we can better coordinate our efforts to hopefully avoid duplication and things of that nature. I just wanted to make everybody aware of that. I know it's not necessarily relevant to the question of whether or not we take on exemptions or not, but I do think that there's some probable value in having that cross-fertilization. So I just wanted to remind folks that is my intention at some point when we have the available time to do so.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. I've been looking forward to that. I think you did mention that in a past meeting. So yeah. Super. Okay, so exemptions and fees are the two that came up with the most comments from our bigger meeting. But so it sounds like on exemptions, there's mixed feelings on whether this is really, our job. Seems very legitimate given the other group that the legislature set up. But also some feeling that there may be some specific things that would rise to the PRAC wanting to pay attention to them as far as exemptions. I'd like to get a baseline sort of feeling on ideas about fees, and then go around, and because those are two clearly things that rose to the top, and then go around and check in on what the priorities for the people who are members of the subcommittee. So yeah, I mean, I'd kind of just like to throw this open. The idea of doing something on fees could be many, many different things. And I guess, I can kind of kick off the ideas of just uniformity, reasonableness, making fees less of an obstacle to getting public records. Those are something that I know would be helpful for members of the public who look for public records. There's also, I'm cognizant of like being able to cover costs. I mean, these things do take time, and I think there'll be crossover in some of the other work we're looking at about trying to long-term change the way records are kept, so it's much easier to do. But those seem to me to be the big balancing pieces. I'd just like to hear from other people. What do you think about when you think about changing the fee laws in Oregon? Todd.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, Emily, and I've been trying to think about how to standardize understanding, which hopefully would lead to some more of a standardized practice among state and local governments, while recognizing that their resources and ability can differ. And I think a lot of what this is, or a lot of how I see reform, is meant to drive public bodies to think about public records requests ahead of time, to bake enough resources into the system so that entire costs of providing records don't have to be conferred or transferred to the requester, and doing so in a way that is equitable and keeps in mind, limitations on resources for public bodies, but still doesn't, again, make it all kind of be borne by the requesters. And honestly, I think the federal system might offer the best model for doing this, because what I'm proposing, what I like the idea of, is changing the standard of, instead of being able to charge actual costs for providing records, a public body may charge up to the appropriate part of the actual cost based on the category of the requester, which is sort of parroting or paraphrasing the federal system. And what that means is we define what factors go into actual cost. There's, under the federal system, there's search time, document review, and duplication. And so if we say, only up to part of the actual cost, this is what is allowed to be included in actual cost, and then say, here are the categories of requesters and what you may charge them based on who they are. So in the federal system, commercial requesters pay for search time, document review, and duplication. News media, educational, or scientific requesters are charged for duplication only after the first 100 pages, and all other requesters are charged for search time, but only after 2 hours, I believe, or that might be specific to the federal agency I looked at, and duplication after 100 pages. And so it's sort of setting a new floor that's much clearer and better defined, while still allowing some recouping of costs, but not the total costs, at least not for most types of requesters. And that's sort of the clearest system I've seen so far for bringing clarity to our own system.
I'm bad at raising hands. I'm not going to talk over all the polite people raising their hands.
I think Steve had his hand up.
No, go for it, Michael.
So I have a very different answer, I think, than Todd's, which is not to say that I think Todd's answer is a bad answer at all. But when you ask me what I think about when I think about fees, is I think about the need for a lot of conversations and for us to sort of inform ourselves by hearing from people in the requester community, in the press community, and also in the government community, and sort of getting their thoughts on like what works, what doesn't work, what's good, what's bad, and how they would like to see the system changed and improved. So to me, when I say that I think that fees is the biggest issue that currently exists in our law, and the one that I think we should focus on trying to address, what I foresee there is not that we, as a majority of this subcommittee or whatever, necessarily should try to solve this by being really smart, but that we should sort of hear from other people and like inform ourselves, and then we should sort of take the best of the ideas that are presented to us, which, it's possible they end up along the lines of the federal system. I think Cameron Miles, who's here I see in the audience, has come up with a system that works pretty well in terms of fees with the legislative assembly, that I've heard at least some positive things about from people in the media community. And I guess I think that it would be a mistake for us to think that our charge on day one is not just identify the problems that we're going to address, but also the solutions we think we might want to land on.
Yeah, thank you.
This
I
is
think
Kim Thatcher, and I'm
yeah.
sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand.
That's okay. Go ahead, Senator.
Just jumping in there. Would it be appropriate for the committee to maybe pose a research topic for the legislative, the LPRO? Can't remember what it even stands for. Anyway, they're the research people for the committees and they will come up with, maybe they can find out what other states do, what maybe best practices are. I don't know. We might be able to just ask them about fee structures in other states or in other situations, and that might help inform the conversation a little bit. I just wondered if that's appropriate, if that would be something you'd want from me to, or Senator, or excuse me, Representative Powers to pursue, because that's what they're there for, is to do that research for legislation.
Thank you, Senator Thatcher. That's a great idea that we should discuss. Mark, you have your hand up, and Steve does too. I'm not sure who put it up first. One of you want to jump in? Except for Mark, you're on.
I know. I'm the slow guy. I really like Senator Thatcher's suggestion, although it wouldn't frankly surprise me if that kind of information is already out there. It would be helpful, I think, for us to look at other states and how they address it. And I would also be curious to hear from our folks in the media whether they've had any conversations with their colleagues in those states as to whether or not they their sort of reaction to their state's system. I think that we do need more information, from a variety of different folks before we can necessarily try to create a new mousetrap. So I do like that idea of having LPRO or another reputable source to provide us information about what is being done in other states, and the sort of analysis of whether or not folks feel that system is adequate and covers the typical hot button issues.
Yeah, I would totally agree. We need more research and information examples. And I think I'm just going to add, we could definitely use it from around the state, because in this, in Oregon itself, the practices vary widely. And it's not always clear what they depend on. I can, without getting a report from the journalist community, which is of course a diverse community itself, but I can say that there's frustration, certainly when it's unclear what fees are paying for. And Steve, I think you've done some looking into this, and obviously you're part of that community as well. So what are your thoughts when you think about what would be the right thing for the PRAC to do to look at fees?
I like what everyone has said so far. I do like the federal FOIA system, or the model that Todd's laying out. And I also think we need more information from the requester community, the responder, the public bodies, other states, more research, clearly. So I'm open-minded as to the specific route that we take to solve the problem. In terms of framing the problem itself, I'd like to see an opportunity to really think big about just sort of changing the nature of how we think about and really think about the disclosure of public records as a public good, whereas currently it's treated very much as a private good. I spent some time over the past couple of days looking through some city websites describing the process by which one files a public records request, and it describes an estimation of fees. This is what your fees will be. You'll be given an estimate. You must pay this estimate prior to getting your records. Sometimes there's a mention of the possibility of a fee waiver, but quite often not. And I think, that's the system that's been presented to public bodies because they're allowed to recoup actual costs, and where else are they going to recoup it but from the requester? There has to be an awareness, I think, at the front end that disclosure is something that we want as a society, and we need to pay for it somehow. It is costly, and first of all, we need to find ways so that it isn't so costly. I think there's better ways to manage and organize records that would not make it so difficult. And I think we also need to find a way to more explicitly account for these costs at the front end, and find a way to publicly fund it if we can. And I don't know whether that could come in the form of some sort of dedicated fund. It could come in the form of just sort of an allocation at the state level. It could be through DAS that it gets accounted for, but some sort of explicit budgeting for this, I think, would be helpful. We shouldn't hide from those costs. We should make them completely apparent to everybody and agree that that it's a public responsibility.
Can you talk a little bit more, Steve, just about ways some of those ideas might go into law? I mean, the idea of funding it, that's clear to me where there's different ways you could make a legislative action on that. And in the idea of awareness of this being a public good, would that be how would that be a legislative action? Seems like almost might be an ad campaign as well, but how would it be a legislative action?
I don't know whether it's a legislative action. I mean, one place to start would be with the budget process, at the state level. I don't know how this would work among cities and counties, but to generate a line item for it when agencies are making their proposals to the governor's office each biennium. Mm-hmm. And then it would become a known cost. And yeah, in terms of legislation, I'm not totally sure. I don't really know. Like I said, I have a sense of what the problem is, but I don't necessarily know the solution.
Yeah, and that was not meant as a challenge, just more as a learning opportunity for myself. I guess I can also, people who are, who are more familiar with writing laws, Senator, Mark, Todd, Michael, I guess you could certainly make a statement at the beginning of any law of just declaring the value of public, records and so forth. So, thanks for thinking that through a little bit. So what I'm hearing is that on fees, definitely there's a big consensus that we would like more information from a variety of different ways, both understanding what is done in different places around the state, around the country, and also what the needs are, what the interests are, what the hopes are from people who are, working with public records day in, day out in this state. So I think we may be able to put that together as something to vote on later in the meeting. Does anybody else have something else they want to add about fees right now? Because what I'd like to do is go ahead and list, get a sense of other priorities and discuss through things that might not have taken the front seat so obviously. And then at the end of the meeting, see if there's anything we can put into some kind of motion that, we want to be formal about. One more thing on fees, though, is it the sense of this group here that this is something that we would, like to try to get the kind of research done that we would need, in time to be able to put something together for the 2023 legislative session? Is that the sense here? I've got a couple
Yes.
thumbs up. Yeah.
I would say maybe, honestly. I think it depends on how deep we want to go, what we hear back from the community, and who we think we need to have on board when campaigning for this bill or concept. I just don't want us to rush into. I just don't want us to rush into systemic change and don't have the necessary votes to make it happen.
I agree, Todd. I completely agree with that sentiment that we don't want to rush for producing a product's sake. But I do think it should be our goal to try to get something for 2023, because I think that regardless of whether we introduce something or not, somebody else likely will. It happened in 2021. And so I do think that we should be endeavoring to have a final product, hopefully that the PrAC can agree to by 2023. Without a deadline, I fear that we'll slow boat this, and I don't want us to not have at least a goal to try to get something by 2023 is my point.
Okay, we have a thumbs up from Todd on that. And I've noticed that Miles Cameron has, who maybe we'll be able to hear from you in the public comment period in a second, Miles, but has put in a link into the chat that might be useful. So just acknowledging that, you know, it doesn't, I think exploring the Ledge Pro would be a great research option. And then there are people out. I mean, we would definitely, you know, be open to public testimony from any groups that want to weigh in or individuals who know about this. Can somebody explain to me oh, Mark, go ahead. You got your hand up. But you have to unmute your microphone.
I know. I told you I'm the slow guy on that. You know, the one thing about having legislative research is that I think that we would need to have a pretty thorough discussion as to what it is we are asking them to research. So that may be a topic of discussion that we have to have, Emily, in order to be concise in what it is we're asking for. And that may require a bit of a discussion by us, but I really do like the idea of engaging legislative research. And if Senator Thatcher is willing to submit something on behalf of the PrAC, I think that would be a wonderful step forward in us being able to gather some relevant information. But we're going to need to be pretty concise in what it is we're asking them to look into. Otherwise, it could be an unfortunate waste of their time as well as ours.
Thank you, Mark.
This is Kim. Yes, I'm happy. I'm happy to submit that, but I agree 100%. We need to have clear definitions on what we're asking for. So perfect.
And Senator, can you just educate me a little bit? So a member of the legislature submits a request, and then what happens? Is it like they get to it when they can, or is it are you able to put, you know, a request for when something comes back, or could you just clarify a little bit how that works?
Well, I can ask them that, I can tell them the whole context of the request. And so, and that what we're aiming for is a specific deadline to come up with some concepts and to see if that's possible for them to get back to me sooner rather than later. But they will have to triage, you know, any requests that they currently have, for sure. But I can probably get a feel for it and get back to the committee or you with that information.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. And thanks again for coming up with that idea and offering to do that. I think that would be a really great resource. Just one more thing to get the feel on here is, as far as that specific task goes, you know, figuring out the request specifically to the legislative research body. I mean, is that something people want to try to do today? Would it be more of seeing a no? Would it be better to like have some draft ideas on paper and dedicate, like, you know, one meeting or one part of a meeting to that coming up pretty quickly? Or yeah, okay. I'm seeing that from Mark, but let me see some other nods or or like hear people whether they agree. I'm seeing Todd nod. Steve, Michael, what do you think?
Wait, yes is to do it today, or yes?
The question is like, since I think Mark and Todd are suggesting that we don't try to get some questions together for the legislative research group today, that we maybe draft a few ideas and then discuss them and finalize that. And I'm seeing a yes from Steve on that. Michael Crone, is that your thinking as well, or do you have other thoughts?
Well, I'd love to do it today, but I think that might be putting the cart ahead of the horse, since I believe we're really supposed to go back to the PrAC first and get them to sign off on our ideas for legislation before we proceed.
I wasn't quite sure like how much of a fleshed out ideas we can take back to the PrAC, but it's a good point. Okay. Thank you.
Emily, if I may, just that's a really relevant point that Michael raised here. I do worry a little bit that having to go through the PrAC to take a step forward on the subcommittee's behalf could create a time lag that I don't think we have the time to lag, if you'll excuse that expression. Todd, I have a question for you. If we were to agree that, I think we all agree that we have to get sign off by the PrAC before we could perhaps move forward with a legislative research request. And also realizing that we don't necessarily have formal bylaws for the PrAC itself. Is it unreasonable to ask permission of the PrAC electronically to be able to move forward on some type of request, rather than having to have a formal PrAC meeting? Because frankly, I don't recall when our next PrAC meeting is. And again, I don't want that administrative sort of step to slow us down, if you will. Any thoughts on that?
Well, the meeting is December 9th, the full meeting. I don't know.
That's pretty soon. Yeah, I think that timing, at least in this case, probably would work fine. But I do fear that if we get into a situation where the full PrAC isn't meeting in a timely manner, that we could be hogtied a little bit. And I want to be sure that we can avoid that pitfall.
Well, Emily, if I may. I don't necessarily view utilizing Senator Thatcher's request to have LegPro do this research for us as the PrAC putting forward a legislative concept. It's just another resource to flesh out an idea to bring to the full council, and that's what we're supposed to do here. I think it's sort of like up to us to decide how detailed these concepts are before we present them to the full council. But if we're utilizing LegPro here as another resource rather than as an attempt to submit a legislative concept, I'm not sure this is an issue that actually does require full council approval to move forward on, unless we're concerned about things like politics and appearance, in addition to the substance of what we're asking to be done, because we don't want to misrepresent what the subcommittee is doing to anybody. But if that's not a concern, I don't see why we can't ask for the research in preparation of an idea for the council.
Well, I think we might, some other people on the full council might have some ideas about like what they would like to learn about fees before, so that they also could weigh any legislative concepts with. So it might be worth it, especially since we're meeting December 9th, to have if there's time, have a short discussion about like what questions do you want answered about fees, and then we could put together a legislative, and maybe, I don't know, would we need explicit permission from the full PrAC that we can go ahead and put the request together, or does that just sort of set a bureaucratic precedent?
Yeah, I'd be concerned about setting precedent like that. We're fortunate to have the next meeting coming so soon. It would be good to hear what other members of the council want, but at the same time, I think we're like 9 out of 13 or 14 members on this subcommittee. So we represent a pretty fulsome sort of representation of the full PrAC. And as a subcommittee, I think we're charged with bringing some of these ideas to voice that the full council already gave its approval on. So I hear what you're saying. It's always good to check in with everyone, but as a subcommittee, maybe we have the ability to also just sort of drive forward with the ideas we come up with and not do that, or at least not do that regularly.
I mean, one thing that's coming up, of course, is like, when are we meeting next? Because to go ahead and, like, have a draft of what we want to ask the Ledge Pro, and then flesh it out and hand it over. So, so I don't know if we could meet in December, that would be awesome, because we could, like, one of us could get a draft together. We could get some more input from Prac, and then we could spend an hour or 90 minutes hammering it out and share something with Senator Thatcher to make that request even by the end of this year. But I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if we have to decide that right this second, but we would want to decide that certainly before we break up today.
I think it would be great if we could set a target for having our request by the end of the year, because it will take some time for LPRO to put this together, not to mention the fact that we'll be having a short session beginning in February, and I suspect that their time will be consumed by that for a period of time.
Great, thank you. Michael, you have your hand up.
Haha, I figured it out. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, I generally agree with Todd that I think it's fine for us to pursue information and stuff. The reason that it felt to me like we should make sure the PRAC wants to proceed with fees in this specific instance is because if we're going to be asking another branch of government to actually do work on our behalf, I would like to be sure that that's work we're actually going to use. I wouldn't feel the same way about asking people to, come in front of us and give us their opinions and sort of voluntary testimony. But it just felt to me like in this what we were specifically talking about was something that I wouldn't want to ask someone else to invest their public time in unless I knew we were actually planning to use it. So that's just a clarification I wanted to make.
Great, thank you, Michael, for that. And it's an important one. And luckily,
Emily, just
looks like our calendar is going to work out. Yes, Senator.
I'm sorry. Just let me know what you need and want. I do have to jump off this call for another meeting, so I apologize, but just keep me in the loop. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for being here and offering that interface. Thanks a lot. Okay.
Right, whatever you decide.
Thanks. Okay, we'll be in touch. Okay, so I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on kind of the thinking around exemptions and around fees. And like I said, we'll put these together to sort of finalize them before we at the end of our meeting, because I want to open, have public comment opportunity as well. Let's move on now, unless people have something else to say about fees. Going once, going twice. All right, there'll be lots more chances to talk about it. But let's go ahead and I'd like to go around and just hear, like Todd suggested, what are the priorities of the folks who are actually on this subcommittee. What's most interesting? What do you think rises to the top for legislative action? Todd, I know you wanted to add one thing, and this is the time when people may find it helpful to look at those two documents that were put in the chat, the subcommittee potential work areas, which if you scroll down past, actually, I'm not sure if this document fully loaded for me. Oh no, the concepts are listed on the second page, but then in the 2021 legislative concepts document, it gets somewhat more specific. It's all a little messy because there's a lot of people thinking about things, but it might help remind you of like what the things, the areas that we talked about. But let's go around with those documents as resources and, your own experience that you bring to this and, the ears that you've had in the communities that you represent and from other members of the PRAC who aren't here. Let's just go around and see if there's other things besides fees and exemptions that people on this subcommittee really want to discuss or, add on. Todd, why don't you go ahead and go first since you have something specific that you want to bring to the table?
Sounds good. Thank you. And yeah, and when I was giving my ideas earlier on fees, I don't want anyone to think that I was attempting to preclude input from other states and other stakeholders. I think that's very important. I just sort of assumed that would happen along the way, but I appreciate the clarification around that conversation and making sure we don't just press ahead without hearing from those that we need to hear from. and that might apply to everything else that we bring up as well. But so in addition to fees and exemptions, I have 3 other things I think we should consider prioritizing. And as I said, only one is new. The other 2 are already on the list. One of which is making sure that there's an appropriate definition of a public body, and that is specifically to make sure that it includes local government elected officials, because there's at least one case pending before the Court of Appeals where a local elected official was not deemed to be a public body for purposes of disclosing public records. And I think that's a woeful misreading of the law that should be specifically corrected. I mean, there very well may be a Supreme Court case that comes out before we could introduce any concept that would clarify that. But if not, I think it's important to expressly state in the law who is included in this definition of a public body. So that's number 1. Number 2, definition of a public record. I don't think we ever want to be so inclusive that we could actually potentially preclude types of records from being included in the definition of a public record as long as they relate to a government conducting its business. But because reality continues to evolve so much faster than the law, I think we should attempt to do some catching up in defining a public record, specifically around the notions of social media or anticipating other future digital platforms upon which these records might be held, and include things like metadata and just other issues that have come up in recent years that hopefully will serve as somewhat of a prediction for what we might face further down the road. I just think it's time to revisit that definition. And finally, the third thing, which is the new thing, is addressing how a public body may sue to appeal an adverse public records order. As you all know, currently, thank you, Mark, as you all know, currently a public body that receives an adverse order from an attorney general or district attorney has to sue the requester. And I am not in any way advocating that a public body should lose its rights to appeal an adverse public records request, but I think we need to seek out a new system where it is not the requester who bears the burden of that defense. And just one idea I will throw out there is perhaps the public body sues or names the order rather than the requester. And therefore, it's potentially the AG or district attorney who issued the order who then foots the bill to defend it. Although a requester, of course, could hopefully be permitted to file a friend of the court brief with their own take on things. And then we need to think about, just some other potential ideas. Consider things like, regardless of who prevails, a public body can never recoup costs and attorney fees from the requester, or if it's now a public body defending the action, the other public body. These are just ideas around the larger concept, which I think is the most important, about how public bodies can sue after an adverse order. And that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
Go ahead, Mark.
Todd, thank you for raising that, Todd. This has been something that's troubled me for some time, and I think you really put it very articulately, the challenge there. I do want to explore this, and I'm glad that you raised it. So I may as well include me on that discussion as well, because I do think that it is a tremendous waste of public resources. And I think that those resources could be better spent in other areas. So I'm in full agreement with Todd's suggestion of including that.
Great, thank you. While you muted yourself again, I was going to say, while you've got your unmute going so well, did you want to chime in on any your own take of, like, what the priorities should be for the legislative, for proposals about legislation? Any additional to, like, some of the things we haven't talked about so far, or any new things you wanted to bring up?
Was that question to me, Emily? I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry. I wanted to go around to all the members, and since you already had your microphone unmuted, I thought I'd stick with you.
I thought that's what you meant, but I just wanted to be sure. Forgive me.
Thank you.
No, my number one issue has been fees. It has been for some time. I just think that, again, and going back to 2021, I just felt that wasn't going to create a uniform system throughout the state. And I think it's really important for the citizens to be able to see consistency across government. And one of my biggest fears was that the legislation that was considered in 2021 was going to create a checkerboard across the state, and I really truly believe that just because you cross a political boundary, you should have consistency, and if there's inconsistency, it creates skepticism and confusion again with the public, which is never good, particularly if you're a public body. So I'm full on board 100%. Let's try to tackle this fee issue, because I think that is honestly and I have no data to back up my assertion here, but I would suggest that that's probably the biggest area of disagreement and contention in the state on public record. So I really do believe that if we were to tackle just fees alone, it would be a tremendous benefit not only to the state but also to the citizens. So I'm really of the belief that that is the issue that needs to be addressed.
Look, I was muting myself. Sorry. Thank you, Mark. Steve, what about you? Your priorities, legislative, again, from your own experience, what you've heard, what we discussed at the PrAC. What do you think we should float up? And do you have anything new to introduce?
I don't have anything that's new. I everything that Todd said makes a lot of sense, and it all seems like needed legislation. I'm wondering whether there's a way that we can accommodate both things. I mean, some of those are fairly straightforward fixes, it seems like, and that they may not be terribly controversial. Fees is going to take a lot of work, right? So I don't know the solution to that, but it seems like you would want those things that are doable to maybe proceed along a parallel track. And I don't know whether that's a different committee, just throwing that out there, or what. I mean, a subcommittee of the subcommittee. But I will say, like, I agree. I feel like fees is absolutely essential, and I would back away from anything else if it furthered the discussion of fees and making progress on it. I did sort of, I talked a number of times about transparency by design, which I think could have specific types of legislation that would make for more efficient storage of records and more efficient recovery of records. Maybe that plays into the fees discussion, or maybe not. We also are going to be discussing that in the non-legislative subcommittee, so that it will get discussed in one place or another. But I think the most important thing is who bears the costs of disclosure.
Okay, Mark, you had your hand up. You have to unmute. Like Siri, you could just, if it were Siri, you could just say, Siri, unmute me. But no.
Well, I just fear that my canines may interrupt and have an opinion of them for themselves. So I'm trying to avoid that. Steve, to your point about, if we were able to agree on other legislative concepts, there's nothing that would prevent us from including that in a fee bill and ensuring that the bill that we introduced was broad enough to be able to incorporate other concepts that our subcommittee and the full PrAC agree to. So again, I think if you can slay the bigger dragon here with a sort of a consensus approach, that other items may very well fall into place. And I don't think that there's anything that would prevent us from including those perhaps lower pieces of fruit to being attached to the fee caboose or the fee engine, if you will. So I don't think our options are limited in that respect. I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, I just want to agree with Mark. We could either pursue an omnibus bill that addresses public records generally and has these different subsections, or we could introduce separate legislative concepts I don't think we're precluded from either path at this point. But I do agree with Steve that we should focus on fees, and maybe while trying to do the other work, I'll add that and seeing what bears fruit over time and what we can actually get to in the short amount of time we have to meet together.
Okay. Michael, priorities?
Well, I definitely think that fees is potentially a full-time job and is the important thing for us to address. I guess if I were to prioritize things next, some of Steve's ideas from our group meeting would probably be on my list, at least, things that are tangentially related to fees at best. The idea that we need to figure out ways to promote transparency as a core public good was one of Steve's suggestions. I think that's a worthwhile thing for us to be thinking about, because I think it is tangentially related to the fees, right? Because it gets to this idea that the person who's asking for public records should somehow be expected to bear the entire cost of disclosing them. Likewise, transparency by design, which Steve already mentioned. So for me, those things, some of the ideas that Todd talked about, I'm happy to discuss, but I'm not entirely sure that having a change in the system of who public bodies sue is actually ultimately going to be advantageous for transparency. Frankly, I think the fact that public bodies have to sue the requesters if they want to appeal is actually kind of a pro-transparency law at the end of the day, because they don't often want to sue newspapers or citizens or, the people who are requesting public records, and they might feel much more free to sue the attorney general or the district attorney, who has neither of whom are given any budget, by the way, to do this work, and both of whom are given 7 days in which to issue their decision by statute. So I think changing that is something that might merit consideration, but I think it's a very simplistic view to think that changing that would actually be a pro-transparency move. I think it would actually way more likely end up increasing the number of lawsuits and public bodies resisting disclosure. And I think actually that's why a similar proposal died the last time it went to the legislature. But anyway, we can talk about those issues. I would not really prioritize them, although I think some kind of solution to that would be a good idea for those occasions where, a private requester does end up on the other end of a lawsuit by a public body, but that might be simply creating some kind of a defense fund or even a role for the public record advocate. But to me, that's a very second or third level consideration of our area of concern with the law at this point.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Mark, you have your hand up still, or again? It's okay. Okay. So I'm going to just weigh in. Fees for me are the thing I think that we really should focus our attention on. And I agree that we should, consider other tangential things if they do fold in, because I don't know if this would be an omnibus bill, but I think, I think certainly on fees, we all realize that it's definitely not going to, it's going to be 2023. And then I think Todd even raised the possibility of beyond that. So there may be, again, maybe not an omnibus, but there may be ways to put some things in there, like even just stating in a bill on fees, stating the value of transparency in government. That might be a tiny, baby step forward on that. Steve just noted in the chat, I'm just going to say for the record for people who are listening, that it may be that others are drafting bills on the problems that Todd noted, and the PRAC could endorse them if there's consensus. So that would be definitely something to watch out for. I do want to ask though, just these two that Todd brought up do seem so simple. I mean, hearing and heeding your warning, Mark, about the 2022 session, like defining public body to include elected officials, like that seems like it's pretty straightforward. Do we have to wait 2 years to do that? The definition of public media record may be more complicated just because it's a little bit looser definition. It's like, trying to define like all platforms in this future or whatever, but maybe it's more simple than that. Anyway, I just wonder if that is something that we should potentially bring back to the full bracket. Like, can we look for some way to get these, put forward somehow in 2022? They just seem so straightforward, and especially with like recent conflicts over them. Can I just get people's temperature on that? Mark, go ahead.
Well, if I may chime in, I mentioned previously, I doubt very seriously that there are any available bills out there. If there are, I probably don't have much indigestion over trying to pursue those super low hanging pieces of fruit. But I just question whether or not there's a vehicle that is available. Emily, that's my biggest concern. And knowing that I had to find a bill, and this was back in early September, I had one heck of a time finding one. So I'm a little bit pessimistic, I think, is probably the fair way to describe my sense of our access to the 22 session.
Yeah.
But if you want to go try to find one, feel free. But I just don't think that they're out there.
I just want to say how happy I am that you and other folks who have a lot of legislative experience and like live and breathe this are on this committee, and because it's just really helpful to have that kind of practical information. So thank you. I appreciate it every time you bring it up. Yeah, I don't know. I'd go have a gander, I suppose. It would be it's due next week, right? You said, Mark? Friday, yeah. So explain though, if you would, sorry, I'm just going to spend another minute on this. Once a bill is introduced, correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously if you needed an idea to attach to it, it would need to be somewhat relevant to the original bill, but the bills would be amended during session, right? So in principle, if you could, and this is very hypothetical, if you could find a vehicle, you might be able to make some, you wouldn't have to be, the language wouldn't have to be finalized, for example, by Friday or whatever, if I'm understanding the process right.
That's probably fair, Emily, but let's be realistic again. The short session is 35 days, okay? If you were to get a bill introduced, you would need that the timelines run such that if my memory serves me correctly, in the first week, those bills have to be worked at. By the end of the first week, those bills have to have been heard, worked, and moved out of those policy committees in order for them to remain alive. All right. So if you were to introduce a bill that wasn't necessarily fully complete, that means that you have to get an amendment, and that amendment has to be put into the bill. This all takes time. The problem with the even numbered sessions is there is no time. You typically want to have your ship seaworthy and ready to sail with few changes as possible in order to have a puncher's chance of getting out of the first round, if my analogy makes sense.
Your multi-sports analogies, I love it. Thank you. Well, hearing all that, Todd, I just want to toss it back to you. These do seem pretty simple. Mark has, has outlined the lion's den. There's another metaphor for you. What would your interest be in trying to pursue these in any way in 2022?
I mean, I'm not super experienced in this area despite my 3 sessions in this office. It seems highly unlikely, and I'd be afraid of them sort of getting lost in the shuffle or opening up unexpected debate that then would delay them, thus killing them. Whereas if we spent more time fleshing them out alongside, say, fees or what have you, when we're hearing from stakeholders about fees, we could also hear from them about these definitions, because they don't seem particularly confusing or controversial, but I want to hear from like the public records custodians who deal with metadata. I want to hear from the active members of the media who request databases and see where they think the inefficiencies are or the deficiencies and how these concepts can be better explained. And I'd want to hear from true tech experts who could maybe talk to us about what the future of digital records look like. We could hear from members of state archives. I know Catherine Helms, and I'm probably going to get her title wrong, but maybe the chief data officer for the state. I apologize, Catherine, if I'm misstating your title, will be speaking to us in December and could probably speak intelligently to this issue as well, because she'll be opening up herself for questions in addition to what she's coming to talk to us about. So this actually could end up taking longer than we'd expect, but I'd rather do as much of the homework ahead of time as possible than end up tripping us up later during a short session when we don't really have time to fix it. Because I agree. I do think these are low-hanging fruit, but I think they are incredibly important. And I want to do it, as right as possible the first time around.
Okay, Steve, you have your hand up?
Well, I am very supportive of all of the addressing these problems and making sure we get it right, and which is why I'm a little bit conflicted, because what Todd just described is, that's a lot of work, and that probably is the right way of doing it. It sounds like the kind of agenda for the next year and a half that would be hard to carry alongside similar inquiries about fees. So I'm not sure about the workload. I'd be interested in what others have to say.
So you're sounding like, Steve, if I can summarize it, you're feeling torn. Yes, that would be useful to get that kind of information from people, even just on those first two. Michael already raised some questions about the third concept about who the public body sues if they're ordered to release when they declined. But just on those first two, the definition of the public official and the definition of public records, going forward, getting testimony and hearing, learning more about that, saying that probably would be the right thing to do, but that might get lost in. It's also a big workload to do that. And are you sort of suggesting maybe we should try to tackle it and not earlier, or what do you want to hear from people on? Is it something specific, should we try to do this in the 22, or is it something less specific, do we need to do all this testimony? Is there another way to get to some language for a legislative concept, even if it's in 2023? Do you have a specific thing you want to hear people to hear?
I guess all of those are options. I think I don't know that we have the time to do the same level of deep dive that we're going to do on fees with all these other topics. So maybe there's a way to streamline that process, or else maybe just to play a less of an active role and sort of keep an eye on what others are proposing out there and see whether there's an in for us.
Okay. Are you aware of anybody's proposing on these things or may propose? Is anybody, a couple people have mentioned this, is anybody aware of anything already? Okay.
No.
Okay, Mark, you had your hand up.
Yeah. If I can speak to that, I mean, we could certainly look for a vehicle that somebody introduces during the short session and see whether or not they're amenable to us adding these low-hanging pieces of fruit. But again, I think that, excuse me, the committee is going to have to grapple with the question that Steve pointed out. Do we want to do a thorough vetting, or do we say this is a low-hanging piece of fruit, let's just get it taken care of? I do fear, though, that if we were to do something in the short session, who's going to be the point person advocating to amend a bill? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into trying to get something like this done, and I don't want anybody to be fooled just because we wave our magic wand, it shall be. It takes a lot of work, folks, and so. I'm a little torn as well. I certainly understand the desire to make progress and do it as quickly and efficiently as possible. And I don't have a good answer whether or not we should go for 2022 and look for a potential vehicle to amend, because frankly, that's the only way I think we could accomplish those two items, is looking for a vehicle that's broad enough for us to amend. But have we done our due diligence enough to make that case? And there's a lot of groundwork that also needs to be done in advance of session, beginning to ensure that the members know what it is you're doing and why you're doing it, and hopefully get their support. So I guess my point is that if you want to try for something in short session, let's be very clear, that work should have started back in September, okay? Number two, the other point I want to make, and it's a little bit off topic, but you know how Steve sort of mentioned we've got a year and a half to work through this stuff. No, we don't. We have 1 year to get through this stuff, because again, bill requests will be probably in December, early December, or late November for the 23 session. That doesn't mean that we can't change what it is we want, because again, we'll have 160 days rather than 30 days to work through the details. But again, my point is these short sessions, if you haven't laid the groundwork well in advance, your chances are slim to none. And that's, I'd rather see us be successful going out of the gates rather than rolling the dice, if you will.
Yeah, and Todd and I think Steve had half raised his hand, so we'll come back to you. I also just want to say there's one of the possibilities I think I heard in Steve's comments were not do as deep a dive on some of these things, but not pursue it in 2022. So that was another potential possibility. Todd.
I'm not sure if I'm adding anything to the conversation, but yeah, I don't necessarily see trying to figure out a newer definition of a public body or a newer definition of a public record being as deep a dive as trying to figure out, changes for fees. I just think as we're doing our research and due diligence and interviews and what have you on fees, we could probably be talking to the same people about their take on these definitions and grow our knowledge as we're growing our knowledge with fees. And also, how many of us are on this committee? We all have connections to these communities that are affected by public records requests. We could vote to charge ourselves, go out and talk to X number of people or people in individual categories and report back to the subcommittee what we found to continue building our knowledge. Because I think the PRAC has had a little bit of an issue in sort of establishing itself up till now, because so much of the work has been focused on finding an advocate that it hasn't been able to sort of introduce itself to the larger world as this bipartisan bench of deep knowledge experts on public records. And I think these legislative concepts we're going to introduce, I think we need to sort of show that we've done the work, show that we've built the coalitions, and that we're bringing a holistic approach that keeps the requester community and public bodies in mind if we hope to really have these succeed. So we need to do the work. We need to show the work. We don't necessarily have to dive as deep into all of it, but we can, I think, pursue these topics on a parallel track. And then when it gets to the do or die date, decide, do we have enough? Are we comfortable with proceeding with all these concepts? Or are we going to have to put a couple aside while focusing, say, just on fees for now? I'm not willing to just get rid of that idea now. At least, I wouldn't vote on getting rid of everything except fees right now.
You would not want to do that.
I would not want to. I would want to try to proceed with at least a couple others along the lines we're discussing.
Okay.
But I will say, Michael does raise a valid point, at least as to why we do need to do more research, because he's not wrong that there could be concerns about, say, changing how public bodies sue requesters could impact transparency. I heard that from members of the media, that they were afraid that if public bodies could turn around and sue orders or DAs and AGs, and not that they would be more likely to do so, but that maybe local DAs might be less inclined to rule against a public body. So there are valid concerns, and all I'm saying is all these concepts need to be researched and vetted as much as we can before we introduce anything. That's just my opinion.
Okay. What I would like to do, go ahead, Michael.
Mark, I'd also frankly be interested in what other states do in this topic area, Todd. right? I mean, just looking at fees, well, what happens when an individual gets an adverse ruling and then is, you know, let's just take the Dows, you know. Why is it, what do other states do in this instance where, let's just use the Dows. The Dows gets an adverse ruling and then turns around and sues the requester. How do other states deal with that? And is there a better mousetrap that we haven't thought about? I don't know. And is that a part of our LPRO request for research? I don't know what the answer is. I don't have a good answer, but that may be a topic that we want to include in our inquiry.
I want to hear from any members of the public who want to testify or, you know, raise questions or bring anything up today. We have about 25 minutes left in our scheduled meeting. Before we hear from members of the public, I'd like to kind of summarize what we want to take back to the PRAC, and so everybody knows we're on the same page. Obviously, people can bring up, anybody who wants to speak in front of the subcommittee can bring up anything that they want to, but and then not actually if we need a vote, we would have a vote after we've heard from any members of the public. So I had a little list. Now I think I've gotten a little thrown off in the last few minutes. The number one item on my little draft list is fees will be our priority as far as a legislative pursuit. I don't know if that matches some sentiment of don't throw everything away yet. That was one thing that I thought we would want to take back to the PRAC, and I wasn't sure of how far, what else we want to take back as far as and our plan to research is Ledge Pro and some research done by taking testimony and research is self-assigned through subcommittee. Do we need to, we'd obviously want to fill the PRAC in on that, but I'm not sure if they'd that part of it they'd need to approve. The other thing that back to our exemptions discussion was that's deprioritized as a legislative concept, that we do want to be in close touch with the Sunshine Committee, but that there was some sentiment to keep ears open for any specific exemptions that may be worth the PRAC weighing in on a legislative change, because noting that the Sunshine Committee has so much to do. And then there's this question of the very, very low hanging fruit of the definition of public officials and public records. It's not, not necessarily it's how to pursue, I guess I want to give them a temperature of how interested we are in pursuing this, and maybe some folks would like to maybe have some guidance on how to pursue it, so we could maybe get some intel there. Is there anything else? Does that represent what we want to take back to the full committee? Is there anything else? Can people help me fine tune this? The mic is open.
If you're looking for the council, not moving on to public testimony.
You broke up a little bit, Steve, but what I'm trying to do is get together the outcomes of this meeting that we will take back to the PRAC and identify if there's anything we actually need to vote on in this subcommittee now, or if there's anything we would specifically request the fuller council to vote on. Yeah.
So not to be too much of an editor, which is my occupation, but I wonder how folks would feel about kind of rebranding the fees discussion with a different word. I think what we're talking about is cost. The word presenting as how to resolve fees, I think maybe presumes we're on a mission to cut fees, which I don't think it gets at really what the task at hand is. It's the cost of disclosure and who bears it and how we pay for it. So I don't know. I think that it might widen the appeal in terms of and it also speaks to our open-mindedness on the issue, and it kind of reframes what the problem is. Not that fees are too high or they're charged too frequently, which, you know, in my opinion, they are. But but it's a broader issue that I think that affects both the requester community and the public bodies.
Yeah. Okay. That works for me. Editors are always gold. Michael?
I agree with the way you're framing that, Steve. I think that's a really valuable way of thinking about it. There are costs to this. We're discussing really who bears them and how do we sort of, to the extent this is a public good, ensure that we're collectively paying for it.
Any other, yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Are you still speaking, Michael? Sorry.
I was, but I shouldn't have been. Go ahead.
I'm cognizant of the time and I do want to open the floor for public comment. So are there of this, are there other shapings to the ideas we want to, you know, the report back to the Fuller Council? And is there anything that people are seeing that we need to vote on in here today? I see Todd's head shaking no, Mark's head shaking no. I can't see Michael. Steve, what do you have an opinion? It's a procedural thing as anything else, but
yeah, I mean, I think we all support. Go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe we want to view this as consent, although I did like your idea of letting the public speak before we formalize anything, Emily.
Yeah. I do want to do that. I just wanted to make sure we all knew what we were talking about, like whether we're talking about we're going to vote on something or whether we're going to talking about this is what we're going to send forward. And then I will go ahead and you know, put this together in a written form to the larger council. But are there members of the public who would like to speak at this time? And thank you for bearing, you know, for being here for the whole meeting. If you're still here, I can't see the number of folks that are here, but are there people who'd like to speak on anything, any ideas of other legislative priorities, of, you know, methods to get information we haven't thought of? I'd certainly encourage people, if they have specific people in mind, you know, who would be good to weigh in on any of this stuff, to let them know what's going on. You know, we'll be, I'm probably taking testimony in lots of different ways, but I'm just going to leave it for a minute here to see if anybody wants to talk. Okay, and a minute now seems too long, so that was 20 seconds. I am going to say that it doesn't sound like anybody from the public who is here would like to speak. So just many thanks for being here and listening.
Emily?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I should have noted earlier, we did not receive any written testimony or comments in advance of the subcommittee meeting either.
Okay, great. Thanks. Forgot to ask that. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, then I think that I've got a pretty clear idea about what to communicate back to the PRAC. I will, what can I do with that, Todd? Can I write that up and send it to everybody on the subcommittee? Or like you would amend it in the meeting if I get something wrong, or how does that work?
Well, you can request a review and edit from subcommittee members, but they should respond to you individually, not all, so that we could avoid any serial or chain communications that would violate the public meetings law. But you can send it to us and we can reply to you one-on-one if we had any edits or things we wanted you to address.
Okay, I'm going to do that and then ask you guys for, like, I'll give you a deadline to reply, and then I'll pass it on to the bigger, to Mark and me and Todd to set the agenda for the next full council meeting. Is there anything else that we need to talk about today?
Just to be clear, we're not trying to meet before the full committee meeting, council meeting, right? Not trying to meet again.
That is something else we need to do. We want to figure out when we're going to meet. Thank you. So, yeah, like, I mean, if we're going to do this work, we are going to need to meet fairly often, right? We're going to want to hear testimony. We're going to want to bring information and research. So how often do we need to meet? Every month? I know Mark will be like, not during the session, and I totally respect that. But look, how often do we need to meet to gather the information, digest the information that we, you know, need to be able to get something together, by September, some kind of shell, at least to hold a spot, and some kind of legislative concept by, a year from now, with much time to work it after that. But yeah, have to meet. Mark, yes, go ahead.
So couple thoughts there. I do think we need to have a pretty aggressive schedule. And, I was almost thinking once every 3 weeks rather than once every month. That gives us probably a couple extra meetings over the course of the next several months. The other thing that seems to be, at least in my mind, pressing is the specific questions that we need to pull together in order for LPRO to begin their work. And my hope would be that we could have something close to finalization by the end of this year, so that request could be, hopefully submitted by early January. Because again, my point that I made earlier, we're going to be going into session. I don't anticipate that LPRO will be able to get to any of this until after the session has concluded, which means that we're probably looking at May that we would get a response. That could be a lot of time, right? And so I do believe that we need to get our request into LPRO sooner rather than later, just because of the calendar challenges that they'll be facing.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so great to have a hive of brains, because that was what I meant to include that on my list of Back to the Prac. And I'd like to have some time on the agenda, the Prac, to, I will put together what I think the draft LPRO request, and that is something that I will send out to everybody here and ask you to reply to me individually to amend it or fix it. And then I would like some time on the Prac full council, December 9th, to present it and get any other feedback, and then plan to submit it through Senator Thatcher by the end of the year. Does that schedule seem reasonable, Mark?
I think so. I think with understanding from the full body of the Prac, and as you pointed out earlier, Emily, we have 9 of 11 on this subcommittee. Mm-hmm. It just seems to me that it's going to be really important for us to try to wrap that up. And so my hope is, and I know that we're dealing with a lot of holidays and family issues and so forth, but I hope that we would be able to meet prior to the subcommittee, prior to the end of the year, so that we could finalize whatever it is we're going to be submitting to LPRO, with the hopeful blessing by the full Prac, if you will, to go forth and do good things.
Okay, with that specific understanding, that makes much more sense. Let's look at our calendars then. Today's the 12th. The Prac's next meeting is the 9th. So I think realistically, if we want to, so there's 2 options here, Mark. We could, the subcommittee could meet before the 9th, and we could finalize an LPRO request ourselves, bring it back to the Prac, and just get a quick thumb up, thumbs down if we want. Because like you said, there's so many of us on. Or we could we could not meet, do a paper edit, as I just discussed. Like, I'll put it together based on our conversation today. You guys email me back individually. We send that to the full Prac and discuss it, and then we could meet. But if in that case, we would have to meet the week of the 13th, I think. If we wanted to meet after the Prac meeting and before the end of the year. And then also, so that's the first question. And then the second question, if we meet every 3 weeks, our next meeting, in fact, would be my calendar would be the week before the Prac meets. It would be the week of November 29th, so the week after Thanksgiving. What can I hear from folks on this group? What do you want to do? Like, if you did it every 3 weeks, it would be the week after Thanksgiving, then the next week would fall in the school winter break, which I know we don't all have off, but lots of people travel in that time period. So we might do the first, we might not skip the 3rd week, but then we might start those 3 weeks in January. What are people's thinking, and what do your calendars look like? The first and most immediate question is, do we want to meet before the full Prac session to finalize a request to LPRO that we would then just hopefully get a thumbs up, thumb down from the full Prac, and any other, move forward with this business in general? Or do we, or do we not want? Yeah, one question is, how do we want to handle this Ledge Pro thing? Or do we just want to go ahead and meet in 3 weeks and pursue that schedule through the year? Sorry, there's a bunch of questions kind of tossed together in there.
I'd be comfortable. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
The other.
I was just gonna say, to me, it makes sense to just say we're gonna meet every 3 weeks. If this time works, then it's okay with me. Normally, I should be able to find time around the meeting to eat, although today I have not, and I'm not going to for a little while. But I think normally that won't be a problem. So my strong preference is just that we set a schedule, put it on the calendar, and I really think that will maximize attendance for people, because they may have 1 or 2 conflicts now, but if it's on their calendar, then those will slowly start to diminish.
Okay, Todd, Steve, your thoughts?
I'm open to meeting every 3 weeks, especially early on, because we have to develop a framework for how we're going to develop. We have to develop a framework for how we're going to pursue this information, start sending out invitations, whatever we're going to do. I think for the specific current issue of coming up with a research question for LPRO, I would be fine with doing it over email. I trust you to frame the issue and for us to be able to cogently, convey our concerns, and then maybe start after that, meeting every 3 weeks, or at least getting it on the calendar.
Steve, thoughts? Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I conceivably could be available the Christmas, the last 2 weeks of the year, if that was a possibility for anybody else, but just throwing that out there. I also could meet like 29th, as you suggest, and maybe even 2 weeks later, just in the interest of keeping it out of Christmas break. But I do think we need to, I think doing the research request by email makes total sense, as long as it's not an email chain, obviously. And I also think maybe we need to set as a goal for ourselves, like an actual process, like kind of a calendar for the next 12 months that will include like who we want to invite to talk to us, in addition to what online research we're going to have Ledge Pro do, and it's so that we can get that schedule moving. So yeah,
I totally agree with that. For me, and I'd like to hear other people. We have just 8 minutes left, but for me, I always find it most helpful when somebody comes with a written piece of like, this is an idea, let's talk about it, and we can go forward. And that requires, rather than try to create that in a group, that requires somebody to do a draft, right? So I have a suggestion that we meet every 3 weeks. The dates you mentioned, Steve, are actually Mondays, and today happens to be a Friday. If I'm looking at 2021, yeah. So I think we should let's get some dates on for. I would suggest every 3 weeks. I think that works well. And then would somebody like to volunteer to start to set up a shell of, these are the dates we're meeting. These are our tentative, goals for this. This is this is, we'd like to have testimony this day, or that. This would be, I could imagine it as a, something that even is shared, if that's possible to do publicly or whatever. So we could in fact move forward on like getting things done every time we meet. But it does seem like we'd want to, I guess I could draft that because the Ledge Pro request would be part of that. I could put a shell together. We just need a lot of fleshing out later on with other people.
But can we do that? If you're basically saying like create a Google Doc and then have people add or subtract things one at a time, would that be considered deliberation?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Emily, if I could, what if we just we could all think about what we want this to look like, and then discuss it at the first subcommittee meeting after the full PrAC meeting, perhaps, and then actually build that framework in that meeting?
Yeah, actually, we could, or the next subcommittee meeting, whatever it is. If that sounds fine. think about things. That's charged. I could, I'll put it in the agenda so it's clear as well.
Well, I like the idea of submitting stuff in writing, but maybe it's just that you're the collator of stuff, and then we discuss it at the meeting. I mean,
Okay.
it seems like we'll have more to sink our teeth into if we've got something on paper, so to speak.
Okay, so I will draft the Ledge Pro request, and I will. Yeah, I mean, this is basically just going to build off what I'm going to report back to the full prac anyway. Here's the kinds of people we want to talk to, and I can put some draft dates on that. And yeah, then we can discuss it at the next time.
But do you want to have each of us send you kind of our thoughts on what questions we'd like them to explore?
Yes, that would be great. Yeah, it could be either proactively or in response to what I send out. Either way is fine, depending on how quick you get it done. And same for me. So if we go back to the calendar, then 3 weeks from now, so you were mentioning Mondays, we were at Fridays now. Where do we want to go for?
Yeah, sorry to confuse things. I mean, Fridays works for me. I mean, so obviously this time worked for everybody, so
Okay.
I'd be fine with that. So it would be December 3rd.
Uh-huh.
And I was just suggesting, like, maybe we compress it. Maybe we just compress it, and rather than going another 3 weeks, which would put us at Christmas, do it again on the 17th.
Okay, that sounds pretty good to me. What about other people? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I could just simply make one request. December 3rd, I'm packed up in the afternoon with meetings. Is it possible for us to meet at an earlier time, say 10 o'clock rather than noon? I know that noon is convenient because it's lunch, but regrettably, I've got a standing meeting during that time. Although if you choose to continue at noon, I certainly understand. It's just I've got on the 3rd a bit of a challenge, and then I'm also looking at the 17th of December real quickly. Yeah, that's wide open for me, and I could do it at any time. I would just need, in order to participate on the 3rd, I'd need an earlier start or a start after 2 p.m., which on a Friday, doubt is going to go over terribly well with folks. So
it's your standing meeting. Can I clarify, Mark? Because I think you do use that word. Is that is that a standing, recurring enough potential conflict?
It's a monthly meeting that just happens to be on the 3rd at noon that particular month. I don't know.
So it wouldn't be like the first Friday of every month at noon would be a conflict necessarily.
Yeah, no, that's when it happens. It's the first Friday of every month. And again, that's just something that I have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. But it
Unfortunately,
would come up go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, unfortunately, I have the opposite situation. I have to be out of the office the morning of the 3rd, but certainly you're welcome to proceed without me. But I wouldn't be able to attend the morning of the 3rd, I'm afraid.
What about the 2nd, people? Michael, you got your hands up. You're going to say you want a doodle poll. You've changed your mind. You want a doodle.
No, I am not going to say that. What I'm going to say is I unfortunately have to go to a 2 o'clock, but I know you guys still have a quorum, and I trust you entirely to work something out and get it on my calendar.
Okay, fantastic.
My own view is that we should just schedule the meetings, and if 1 or 2 of us can't make them at a regularly scheduled time, I think that will go away over time, but that's just my view. And I, like I said, trust you guys, and I have to go. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for participating. Hope you get some lunch. Bye. Okay, remaining quorum. I'm really open for anything. My schedule is often very flexible, and certainly past next week, it's flexible. So
What does December 2nd look like for folks?
I'm pretty open. 12 to 2, 1 to 3, anything like that would work for me.
Can you go later? Later is always better for me. I work with East Coast hours.
Deadlines.
Yeah,
I can do later in the afternoon on the 2nd as well. My day on that particular day is pretty darn flexible.
I'm open till about 4:30 on the 2nd.
Yeah, I'm totally open. So
Can we do 2 to 4 then?
That'd be great.
Okay, can we go ahead and then the PrAC meets the following Thursday, and then shall we do one more meeting before the end of the year, either that week of the 13th or the week of the 20th?
I'm fine with that. I'm going to be out of the office the oh, sorry, where'd the calendar go? The 21st through the 29th.
Okay. Should we try to meet the week after the PrAC then? That would be, we would meet, this subcommittee would meet the first half week of December, then the PrAC would meet the next week, and then we could maybe have a brief meeting just to finalize the Ledge Pro thing or something like that. I don't know.
Try 17th at noon.
17th at noon, does that work for the 4 of us here?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then going forward, so if the 17th,
What day of the week is the 17th?
It's a Friday.
Okay.
Yeah. 3 weeks from then is January 7th. Should we go for January 7th and then continue with our 3 weeks out every Friday? Or should we start the 14th? I know January 7th is already a conflict with Mark because of what you just said, but I'm totally open.
I haven't gotten
go ahead,
sorry, I haven't gotten a final schedule, but potentially attending a conference that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking Fridays, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking the 7th specifically. I'm sorry. Yeah, January 10th is fine for me.
Wait. January 7th is a Friday in 2022.
Okay, I should probably look at January then before I answer any questions. I'm still in December. Sorry about that. I'm fine with the 7th of January.
Steve?
Yeah, I'll just put in a pitch again for a later hour if that's feasible.
So that would probably mean, like Mark was saying, moving the day, right? Because like Friday at 2, Mark, you were suggesting is not the best time to.
Oh, that's not for you. Okay, that's fine. I can do noon. It's just yeah.
I mean, I think people are open. So you're locking in for the rest of the year here. So you know, if this is a hassle, let's do something that will work.
So it's just on that particular day, Mark, when late in the afternoon doesn't work?
Yeah, no, it's just typically people don't like doing work on late Friday afternoons. I'm happy to dig in if that's the need. So if we want to meet, say at 2 o'clock on the 7th, that's fine.
I could meet you halfway, 1 to 3.
That actually is beautiful.
Okay. So then what I have right now is December 2nd, 2 to 4, December 17th, noon to 2. I've already forgotten why the difference. Oh, I know, but we could also make the 17th 2 to 4 or 1 to 3, if that would be preferable.
That was the 17th. I'm moving back to the 17th. Sorry.
Because I'm sorry, I'm going to assume going forward from January 7th, we'll do Fridays, every third Friday, 1 to 3.
Okay.
Yeah, sound good? And then, so I just want to go back and double check these December dates, just given these time shifts. Does either December 2nd, we have 2 to 4, and December 17th, noon to 2, would it work to move that to 1 to 3?
It'd be a little easier on my schedule to make it 1 to 3 on the 17th.
I'm fine.
Steve, is that helpful to you? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we have December 2nd, 2 to 4. Do we need to make that one 1 to 3?
Gesundheit.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up, folks. We're talking about December 2nd.
Yeah,
I can do that.
1 to 3.
I can do that.
Or Steve, you'd rather keep that 2 to 4?
I'd like to keep that 2 to 4 if we can, and that's a Thursday, so it's not.
Right,
yeah.
That's a Thursday. Thanks. Okay. Okay, and then the rest of these are Fridays. Okay, so we have Thursday, December 2nd, 2 to 4. Friday, December 17th, 1 to 3. January 7th, Friday, 1 to 3, and every third Friday going forward, 1 to 3. Great.
And I will get those invites out.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, everybody, anything else?
No, other than
Chris,
I will
yeah.
get the recording rendered as soon as possible and up on the Prax website.
Thank you. I will do
Yeah,
the same with some kind of summaries. Mark.
And I do have one reminder that we will be in legislative session beginning in February. It may very well work out that if we are conducting our meetings on Friday in the afternoon, I may be able to actually attend just because they tend to not do much on Fridays. So if it's the chair's desire to continue these meetings through session, which I think is probably wise, please feel free to go ahead, and my participation will depend on the calendar of the legislature, but I don't want me to be a hindrance in us making progress.
You haven't been yet. I don't think you will be in the future. And thank you for noting that and being, noting that that's a tough time, but that Fridays may make it available. So of course, it's always great to have you in these meetings. Okay, so I think we're good. Nothing else to decide today. Thanks everybody so much. It's good to see you all, and thank you for taking the time.
Bye-bye.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
You too.